So I should start off with most of the pictures from this presentation, if they involve a live chicken or bird, I got them from Adam Hayden, which is the agriculture agent out of Richland County. So that's why I put on there his name. Then, did you want me to start yet, or should I? Because I can do this disclaimer and then I could stop.
Disclaimer is fine.
Okay. Sure. So then I also want to put on a disclaimer on here. I did run to Fleet this morning and I took some pictures of some different feedbacks that they had. So even though I've got the names of their feedbacks on there, Extension is not endorsing that product in any way whatsoever. It just happened to be convenient for me because Maryland was close. So I just stopped wherever had feedbacks for me to grab the feed. So know that I'm not endorsing any one product. Okay, so kind of an overview, some of the topics that I was going to talk to you guys about tonight was selection of chickens, housing and equipment, some winter considerations. I know that seems kind of funny because it's not winter time now, but it will be eventually, sooner than we think. A little bit on starting chicks, some poultry nutrition basics, pasturing poultry a little bit, general poultry health, and layers and eggs, and then some meat birds. Before we get into that though, I did put in this slide. How many of you have chickens already? Okay, those of you that have chickens, how many of you have a premise ID?
Have a what?
A premise ID? Okay, that's why I put it in there, because unless, I know you're from a farm, but unless you're from a farm base, most people have never heard of a premise ID. And so a premise ID is for any person that has livestock on their farm or on their premises. So poultry counts as a premises, okay, or excuse me, poultry counts as livestock, okay? So the reason that it's important is this big word right here, avian flu, all right? What we're finding in the counties that have birds that have shown up with avian influenza, there are farms that do not have premise ID, and they're mostly backyard flocks that have not registered for a premise ID. And so when DATCAP comes in and they're trying to narrow down where the location of this avian influenza is, they don't know. Because if I've got 3 birds in my backyard, which I do, if I didn't have a premise ID and my neighbors don't tattle on me, nobody knows that I've got these birds. And I could have avian influenza and I could be spreading it, but nobody would know that it was me doing the dirty work. So that's kind of why I threw this in there. So in order to get your premise ID number, it's really easy. You can Google premise ID Wisconsin, or you can just go to the Wisconsin Livestock Identification Consortium, and their website is www.wiid.org. Okay?
Do you need that just for the chickens?
You need it for any livestock. If you've got horses, if you've got goats, if you've got swine, and you have to register with them every animal that you have on the premise, and then you need to renew your premise ID every 3 years. Okay?
What's the cost of that?
It's free. It's mandatory, so you are legally required to have a premise ID. So if you do not have one and you do have animals on your property, you can get in trouble for it by the state. So once you go to this website, up at the top, there's this link called premise registration. So if you click on that, it'll take you here, and down at the bottom it says, how do I register? You can register online, or they have a paper version that you can just print off and then mail in, so it's really easy. I did the online one, and it was super simple. I got a card in the mail. The card that you get looks just like this, Wisconsin Livestock ID Consortium, and then it has your premise ID number right down here, and it's a series of letters and numbers. And if you have kids that are going to be in 4-H, you need a premise ID in order for the kids to show their poultry at fair, or any animal at fair. You need a premise ID number. So. Come on in, The only thing you've missed so far is we went over premise ID, and that you need to have a premise ID. Okay, so benefits of raising chickens. Those of you that have chickens, what do you see as the benefits? And don't read my slide.
Eggs.
Eggs. What else?
They keep down the bug population.
Okay, I didn't put that up there, but that's true. They do, okay, because they forage for the insects. What else?
Laughs.
Laughs, lots of laughs, right? So we all know the obvious, right? They're going to give us eggs if we've got egg type. They're going to give us meat if we've got the meat type bird. Can an egg type bird give us meat? Yeah. Can a meat type bird give us eggs? They can, if we let them live long enough. They'll give us eggs as well. And then pleasure. For me, I've got 2 boys at home, and it's the pleasure aspect of it. I mean, and responsibility, because my boys are in charge of feeding them and watering them every day. So it's helping teach them some responsibility skills.
Manure's good for the garden too.
You do? Fertilizer, right? Okay, chicken manure works really good for fertilizer. So selecting the right chicken for you really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the egg type bird, if you're looking for the meat type bird, or if you're looking for the bird that's more of an ornamental type bird or a dual purpose bird or something you're gonna show. So what you get is really up to you and what works for you. There's many different breeds. The American Poultry Association recognizes about 55 breeds of standard chicken and 65 breeds of bantam chicken. Do you guys know the difference between the standard and the bantam? Okay, so a standard bird is going to be the larger ones, and I've got a picture coming up for you of a Cornish hen, and one's bantam and one's regular. And so standard is going to be the regular, like big chickens, and then the Cornish are going to be like a dwarf size. Okay, and then there's many other breeds that are not recognized, so like the crossbreeds and stuff. Like we said, there's different types. You've got the layer type, so the layer types are going to have a thinner frame body, and they're known for giving us eggs. You've got the meat type, they're going to be plumper, they're going to have bigger breast areas because that's where we're going to get the meat from. Your dual purpose is going to give you both eggs and meat, so you're going to, where layer type is specialized in eggs, you get the most eggs out of a layer and you get the most meat out of a meat type. So your dual purpose is going to be kind of an intermediate in both egg production and meat production because it's that dual purpose bird. And then you've got ornamental, which is used a lot of times in fairs or exhibitions. Say that 10 times real fast. Okay. So, standard versus bantam. So this one right up here is your standard dark Cornish hen, and then on the bottom is a bantam dark Cornish hen. So these birds are both 2 years old, but as you can see, this one's a lot bigger than that one. Okay. So all standard chickens have a bantam. So every variety of standard is going to be in a bantam form or a short form, but not all bantams have a standard. Okay? So you can have some short ones that there are no big ones too.
So bantam is smaller.
Bantam is smaller. All right, so what color? Chickens come in many different colors, right? All right, you can get the gray variety, the dark variety, the blacks, the reds, or you can get your standard white variety. Again, it's all up to you guys on what you want, and if you want colored eggs or not, okay? Do you know which ones of these chickens will give me a colored egg?
The black one and the red one.
What about this one?
I don't know about that one.
Okay, but yeah, so the black one and the red one will definitely give me color. If you have color in your bird, you're gonna get color in your shell. Because the color from the shell is given by the pigmentation of the skin, which is for the feathers that are exhibited within that bird. Okay, so this one will give you a colored egg. It'll be more of like the greeny colored eggs. Okay, or like the brown and the blacks will give you more of that red color egg. Okay, so all that coloration is just pigmentation from the bird. Okay, it doesn't mean anything about the quality or of that egg that you're getting. Okay, so then there's also different patterns. So you can have spangled, which you can see is just a mix of different colors. The barred is more of like a ribbing effect. You guys have maybe heard of the barred rock, and that's because of that. You've got the mottled, you've got the Colombian style up there, or you've got lace. So again, it's all sort of what you guys are interested in and what type of bird that you get. All right, and some people are interested in strange looking birds, so this one's got some feathers coming out on his head, making him look funny. There's other birds that have feathers that go down on their legs and kind of cover them up and give them like a boot looking sort of look. All right, did you know there are many different types of combs? Okay. The most common type that we see is going to be the single comb, but there are other types. So you've got the pea comb, you've got the strawberry, the cushion, the rose, the V-shape, the buttercup, and the walnut-shaped combs. So depending on the breed of chicken that you get, it's going to depend on what type of comb that you end up getting. So again, if you're interested in the combs, then you'll have to look and see what breeds have those combs. Okay. Chad, where'd you get your birds from?
Abendroth Hatchery in Waterloo.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Tyler? Where'd you get one? Abraham. You guys had birds, right?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I
don't know your name.
That's okay, I'm Heather. Mine I got from online, hatchery,
Okay,
from, I don't remember the exact one, one of the big ones that you can order online.
okay.
So I was just looking what kind I have, because I don't know the name, so I just picked a pretty one.
But that works, that's how you picked your bird, right?
Yeah, I wanted a pretty
What
one.
was pretty to
So I
you?
got 6 from there, and then I got 2 from Marathon Feeding,
Okay.
and then I got some from down in Wyawega, because I wanted to try the, I can't say it right, buff or. Yeah, those, that are supposed to be really sweet, and I mean this one.
So a hatchery. Anybody else get birds that didn't get them from a hatchery? Where did you get yours?
I got them from my daughter-in-law. They were her chickens and then they moved out of town, so bird stayed at the farm, so that's how I got mine. My neighbor gave me 2 of her hens. So I have 2 black rooster wolves and then 2 brown ones, I don't know what they are. And then I have a black rooster, same breed as them.
Did I see hand on the back?
We got some that were already laying from a farm in Amherst.
Okay, you just went straight out to the farm and bought them?
Do the differences in appearance mean a difference in personality, or don't chickens have?
Not necessarily. They do have personality. I mean, they're just like any other animal. They're gonna have their own personality. But I would say there's some breed differences to it, but not necessarily appearance. Like it's not associated with because they have, you know, a P-shaped comb, they're gonna be more docile or anything. It's more just the breed. Like the Buff Ormingtons are supposed to be really docile and really easy to handle, like so if you have kids.
Yeah, they're not.
What?
They're the ones that are the least out of, those were from a farm in Wyawega.
Yeah,
I got
and they're
those
not.
guys from. And I ended up getting 2 bantams because they were cute. I'm like, oh, those are cute. But, so those are the really docile ones, the bantam ones out of those, but the regular ones are not as friendly. But I think it just depends on anything. It's like a dog or a breed.
Yeah, I mean, they all have their own personality, and it depends how much you get handle them
Right, that
and,
really
and
is.
their experiences with you. Like if you're really rough on them as they're growing up, like if you startle them easily, then they're gonna be more afraid of you as they
I
grow.
wasn't rough. They were in my house. They're all.
It's
pretty
all in
rough.
the eye of the chicken.
Yeah.
So, the most common places that people get their birds is gonna be from a hatchery, okay? And they've got large quantities of chicks, and they'll normally sell you day-old chicks, so you can get them when they're young. But the breed type may be lacking, because normally a hatchery is gonna specialize in 1 or 2 or maybe 3 different breeds. So they're gonna have their specialty, and those are gonna be the breeds that they're gonna do. You can go to breeders, you know, or go to different farms to get them. The breed type's normally gonna be better, meaning that they might have more variety, because that's what they're breeding for. They're breeding for that specific breed, they're specializing in that breed, so they're gonna try and enhance the genetics within that breed. You can probably buy smaller quantities. It's not, I would say that's not so much true anymore, because you can go to a hatchery and get, you know, 2 birds, if you just wanna get 2 birds. But there used to be a time where you had a minimum order from a hatchery, that you could only buy 50 birds, or they wouldn't sell you anything, because they didn't wanna deal with the shipping cost. But things have changed now. One thing from the breeders that you can do more so than the hatcheries is you can get older birds. So if you want layers, you wanna go more to a breeder type or a swap or an auction. Because the hatcheries are gonna give you those day olds. They're gonna specialize in the younger animals. The other one I have on here is the swaps and the auctions, and because of avian influenza, a lot of these are going away. Okay, and a lot of them went away. I don't know if you guys heard of the prairie dog incident several years ago, but a lot of swaps and auctions went away with that. But you still can sort of find them, and Craigslist is, I would say, my version of the current day swaps and auctions. Okay. But normally you can get birds that are inexpensive. You can purchase the mature birds again there. And then, but the biggest issue is the health, okay? Because you don't always know the health of what you're getting from a swap or an auction, more so. Something that's nice too is if you purchase from a hatchery or a breeder, a lot of times they're already vaccinated. So, like if you buy from a hatchery, you can specify that you want to get them vaccinated for Merck's disease. Because we're going to talk about Merck's later, but you have to vaccinate for Merck's disease while they're still in the embryo or in the shell, or the day they're born. So if you don't get them vaccinated, then the vaccine, we don't know you can vaccinate them later, but we don't know the efficacy of the vaccine as the bird gets older, because it's only been tested with chicks that have been incubated or injected while they were incubated or vaccinated right when they were born. So that's one of the benefits of getting it from a hatchery. Okay, So next, we're gonna talk about housing and equipment that you need in order to raise your chickens, and those are ducks, but pretend like they're chickens. All right, so the key factors in housing, and those of you that already have chickens know this, it's just like any other animal, you wanna make sure that it's clean and dry. They don't wanna be in their own manure or their own feces. They need adequate ventilation, and it needs to be draft-free, especially when we're talking about the chicks. So it's a nice balancing act that you have to get between enough ventilation and not too much ventilation. Okay? And then they need proper space. So depending on the size, you've got layer pullets. So layers are gonna be those that lay eggs, and then pullets are gonna be the babies or the chicks, okay, the young ones. So the pullets are gonna need like 1.5 square feet per bird. When they become adults, they're gonna need 2 square foot per bird. If you have a broiler, so broiler is gonna be your meat type bird. If you've got a meat type bird, they're gonna need 2 to 3 feet or square feet per bird. Okay, just because the broilers, they bulk up, they get wider, so they're gonna need more space as adults. And then you need to provide them protection. When I was living in Illinois, I was an FFA teacher, an ag teacher before this, and we had chickens. And we built them a nice little coop, but we wanted it to be higher because we didn't want them to get out, but we wanted them to still be able to spread their wings. So we just did like 3 rows of chicken wire, and we zip tied it together, and we thought that would be adequately sufficient. And came in one morning, and there was an owl that had got in between our chicken wire, and he couldn't get out, of course, but he was able to get in, and he ate all our chicks. But, so you need to make sure you provide them protection from both disease, but then also the wild animals that like to get in there and eat your chickens. So, like this year, we had more chicks than we currently have, and that would be because my cat ate them. But, I don't have good luck, can you tell? I don't know why you're learning from me. But, so besides housing, they're also gonna need a feeding system and a watering system. So the feeding system is basically just some way to provide them with clean food. Okay, other than just putting it on the floor, you want some, like a tray or something to feed them. You're also gonna need a watering system, so again, some way to provide them with water. So I don't know if you can see this here, but this is a watering can. It just sort of sits, he's got it on a little block here. And then this is a hang from the ceiling feeder type. So again, you can go to pretty much any of your ag stores, and you can get different types of feeders or different types of waterers. So there's some that sit, and there's some that hang on off the ground. If you have a layer, they're gonna need a nesting box, because they like to go in somewhere, they like a privacy space when they're laying their eggs. So you wanna have 1 square foot for every 4 layers. So 4 birds, they can share it, because they won't all go in there at the same time. But you wanna make sure that you have space for them to have their privacy while they're laying their eggs. Then they also like to have a roost, and I have 8 inches here per bird, and that's an average. It's like 6 to 10 inches that the bird needs, again, depending on that size of that bird. But they just like to hang out, okay? Especially at nighttime, they like to be up. You know, I'm sure you guys have all seen turkeys fly up into the trees. They like to have something to grab while they're sleeping or just hanging out. The other nice thing about the roost is that if you have a roost in one particular part of your coop, the chickens are gonna sort of like hang out in that area, so then the manure is going to accumulate in one spot throughout your coop, and you won't have to clean it throughout the whole entire coop, just basically underneath that roost area, because that's where the manure is gonna be. Your chickens are also gonna need supplemental lighting, especially if they're layers. If they're meat birds, it's to a certain extent, but it's more important for layers, because your birds are gonna lay based on the day length. They can sense how long the day is. And so I have on here like 14 to 16 hours of supplemental light. Like summertime, we're good, but it becomes more of an issue in the wintertime where you're gonna have to supplement with this light. And I go into that a little bit later too. But if you've got brooding or chicks, so brooding is that period where you're having to physically take care of the chicks. It's the period where the mother would be taking care of them and keeping them warm. You want to supply the chicks with supplemental heat, and basically you want to keep them warm. And I've got some more pictures of that too coming up.
What if you have a hen that is sitting on eggs?
She will brood.
In the manure?
Yes.
I won't need to put anything to hold them.
I'd watch them, because some hens are really broody, meaning they'll really take care of them. Other hens, because as time, as we've bred these chickens, we've sort of bred the broodiness out of them. So they'll sit, but then they'll have nothing to do with them after they hatch. So she may or may not take care of them.
Like, if you have a chicken, but say you don't have fertile eggs and she goes broody, how can you break her from that? Or
You gotta just keep stealing her eggs. It's hard, because once they get broody, it's hard to break them of that habit, but if you keep stealing them, sometimes they finally just give up, and they're like, oh, well, there's nothing there, you know.
Will they brood forever once they start that?
Some will, some won't. Again, it's a chicken thing. I mean, an individualized chicken thing, because most chickens, you know, they lay their clutch, and that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to sit on them, they're supposed to brood them. But, you know, with us taking them every day, and we've sort of read that out of them, most chickens nowadays will not, but some still do. So, and they don't know, I mean, because chickens lay an egg whether it's a fertile egg or not, so they're gonna sit on it just in case it happens to be fertile. So, yes.
I know absolutely nothing. I'm coming in blank. So I just wanted to clarify some of the square feet things.
Okay, you
Um,
want me to go back?
No, you don't need to, I don't think. But when you say square foot, they know a large pullet or layer pullet or layer adult is 1.5 or 2 square feet per chick. Are you talking about the area outside or the area inside?
Inside the coop.
Inside the coop. And so then the nesting, the nest, and you said 1 foot per 4
Yes,
birds.
1 square foot per.
Does that mean that, what does that mean?
So that means you can have a nesting box, you wanna make sure
Yeah.
your nesting box is 1 square foot.
Four.
And if I've got 4 birds, I only need 1 of those nesting
Only
boxes.
one of those nesting boxes?
Yeah, if I've got 8 of them, then I wanna put 2 in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they will share
They'll
a
share,
nester.
yeah.
Okay, and then what exactly is a roost when you say roost?
Okay, so it's basically any sort of perch.
Mhm.
Like this arm could be a roost, it's something
Okay.
that they can grab onto.
All right, it's variable.
Yes,
Okay.
it's very, you can make it anything you want. If you wanna hang like a dowel rod in there, it could be a dowel rod. A lot of times it's just a 2x4 that they can grab onto.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
My wife was just asking if a bird goes in to lay and leaves an egg, will another one go in there? And I think they will.
They will.
Yeah.
Or you don't have to keep taking, you have to be there right away to take before another one will lay?
No, you don't have to immediately, although some hens do become cannibalistic. And so you may find that, like, you'll end up with broken eggs.
Okay.
And that's because some of the eggs are going in and pecking at it. And so if you notice that, then you're gonna have to watch them more and take out of them. And if you can determine which hen it is, then I would say get rid of her. You know, just because you're gonna have that issue, yeah. I mean, she's constantly gonna be that way.
Right, you can't break them.
Yes, yes. She has another purpose.
And then I've read too much information, but they recommend that my roosting boxes you have to go in the coop to get the eggs. And a lot of people say that field access a lot between outside.
It depends, because like it's that startling factor. So some hens don't like it when you come into their nest or into their area space. So then that's where it would be nice if you had it outside and you can just gather it up. You know, and it's easier too, like if you have kids, you don't want them to go in where all the manure is and stuff. So if you want them just to be able to reach the box and grab it out. So you can do either. You
I
can
mean, they're
do,
roosting and I can get like 8 inches from them and they're like, duh. So I don't think they'll have a problem.
yeah, they're,
But that's the reason why they want to access from the outside so you don't plug them.
that's really it. And it's just honestly, I've found that it's convenience factor for a lot of people, that it doesn't really bug the birds as much as it bothers the people. You know, because when you walk in there all the time, you're gonna get it on your shoes, the manure on your shoes. You're gonna disrupt the birds a little bit, but with your constant coming in and out, they're gonna get used to you. I mean, they're like any other animal, you know? But yeah, I know, because I know one guy that has them outside, and I'm like, why'd you put them outside? And he's like, oh, it's just for my kids. I didn't want them to have to go in the coop all the time, because he was afraid they were gonna leave the door open and out went the chickens.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, you can do either. The coop, the nesting box can be inside the coop, or it can be where you can just lift it up and get
Access
them
from the
out.
outside, okay.
Yeah. Oh, did I finish this? I don't think I did. So then the last part is a brooder guard, and all the brooder guard is like cardboard or something like a containment mechanism, so that you can keep the brooders or, you know, the young pullets underneath that heat source, because chickens only have a brain the size of a pea, so sometimes they'll wander off, and even though the heat source is over there, they'll just keep wandering. And they won't realize that the heat's back there, so they're gonna keep wandering this way, trying to get warm. And eventually they get so far from the heat source that they end up, getting too far away and then they get too cold. So we put out what's called a brooder guard, just to basically surround them or contain them to a certain area so they can't get away from that heat source. Okay, and there's different ways of doing it. Like I just bought a 150-gallon water trough. And I just put when I'm brooding, they're in the water trough with a heat lamp hanging over it so they can still get out and get away, but they can't get too far away where I have to worry about them getting cold. But the other thing is you can just put up like corrugated cardboard to surround them. Anything you guys can think of. You can buy something or you can manufacture something on your own. Did you have a question?
No.
Okay. Okay, so some winter considerations. We're going to talk about kind of considerations for the birds, adjustments to the feed, the equipment, litter, insulation, ventilation, and then heating. Okay, so basically considerations for the bird. You want to make sure that your birds go into the winter in the best health possible because the cold is going to put some stress on them. So you want to make sure that you're not having them stressed out because they're having parasites and also stressed out because of the cold weather. So you want to make sure you get rid of all the parasites that they might have, internal and external. Okay, so have them dewormed and then give them a dust bath for mites. And we'll go into that a little bit more too later. And then if you have any that are unthrifty or not looking so hot, this would probably be a good time to kill them, or cull them off right before winter time, just because then that way they don't have to go into winter and possibly die throughout that winter period. The age of the birds, you want to make sure that you don't have any chicks or young birds going into the winter time because you want them to be mature because young chicks can't manage or sort of control their body temperature. They don't have feathers yet. So you want to make sure that you're not, if you're raising your own chicks and you're hatching them out, you don't want to hatch any too close to wintertime. You want to make sure that they go into the winter as adults. And then very old birds, again, as the chicks get older, it's a more sensitive period for them as well. So kind of make sure you've got healthy birds and that medium age sized bird going into winter.
Could you talk a little bit about like the getting rid of parasites? Is there?
I've got a whole section on like disease control.
Okay.
So
How old do you recommend they be going into winter, like the minimum age?
minimum age, I'd say they gotta be past that brooding period, so at least 5-6 weeks. Okay, so some winter feed adjustments. You wanna make sure they have a balanced ration throughout the year, but in the wintertime, they're gonna need extra energy, they're gonna need extra fat to maintain their maintenance that they have to carry out, but then also keeping up with that extra need for heat to generate, or that energy to generate heat. So you're gonna add extra energy to your diet. Normally you're gonna add like cracked corn or some scratch grains in order to get that. So this is just a picture of cracked corn, and then I've got scratch grains later, that's pellets right there. So it's just representing, make sure you give them some pellets and also some cracked corn and then some scratch grains. And all scratch grains, if those of you that are scratching your head right now, is scratch grains are things that you can kind of just put down. It's like rolled oats, barley, and that type of stuff. It's just basically grains that you're giving them, and they call them scratch grains because you can put them out in the grass and then they'll scratch around for them, and it sort of helps them figure out how to go through and forage for their own stuff. So that's why they call them scratch grains.
Do you recommend a year-round, like crushed oyster shell and stuff too for them?
Yeah, year-round oyster shells are definitely when they're laying. It's not necessary prior to the laying period, but once they start laying, it's really important. And we're gonna, when we talk about layers, I'll hit that too. Okay, so water is important year-round. Okay, so you want to make sure that you have adequate access for your birds to water. They're going to drink twice as much water as feed by weight generally. So if they're eating 1 pound of feed, they're going to be drinking like 2 pounds of water. Okay, and then in this winter time, you have the issue of it freezing. So they make water heaters. So you can use heaters, or if you're not into the heater thing because you're worried about fires, then just make sure you're bringing them out multiple like fresh waters a day. Okay, so you want to swap that water out. So different types of waters that you can get. There's rubber pans where you just have, it's just a rubber pan, just a bucket you put down for them to drink out of. You wanna make sure it's not too deep, because you don't want your chickens to fall in there and drown. But then also the heater methods, they've got the base heaters, then they've got the light bulb over the top heater, and then they've got submersible heaters. So, these are just from Cutler Supply, so this would be the base heater, and this is one that they had at Fleet this morning when I went there. And then this is, the submersible heater, and then that's just the light bulb over the top heater there that you can get from Cutler, you know, or anywhere else, basically. Okay, so the litter, in the wintertime, you wanna give them extra litter. It's like anything else. You want, the litter on the bottom of the floor helps keep them warm, helps keep them insulated. So you want 6 to 12 inches. Start giving them litter or insulating the floor before the wintertime, because then you can trap in some of that heat of summer in there, okay? And then one thing that I've heard, and I've never tried composting the litter, but they say you can compost it and you just basically keep adding litter to it. So fresh litter to your composted litter every year, and then, or throughout the year. And then it'll start to compost, and then that composting will kind of warm the birds.
What do you mean litter? Like cat litter?
No, sorry, so like shavings.
Oh, like pine chips?
Yeah,
or
like pine chips,
straw?
pine shavings, straw, whatever you're using at the bottom to kind of collect them in.
Oh.
Was that your question?
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, stop me if I say stuff that doesn't make sense. The biggest thing is that if you do have the litter in there, you wanna make sure you keep it dry, because the birds have to stay dry. As soon as they get wet, they're gonna get chilled and they're gonna get cold. So you wanna keep it dry and clean. A big issue with wintertime litter considerations is the buildup of ammonia. So, those of you that have chickens, you all know that they're not always very pleasantly smelling. And that's basically because of the ammonia. And if the ammonia buildup gets too high in there, then it's gonna end up causing respiratory issues within the birds. So you just wanna make sure that you're adding enough clean litter to sort of bury that ammonia layer, okay? Okay, so insulation, if you're building your coop from scratch, it doesn't hurt to add some insulation to it. It's good for both the summer and the winter time, because the insulation's gonna help keep the fluctuations within that coop down, okay? It'll keep it cooler in the winter, or in the summertime, and warmer in the winter time. If you can insulate both the walls and the ceiling, that's the best. Make sure that the insulation is inaccessible to the birds, because they will try to eat it, all right? So you can cover it with plastic or plywood. I wouldn't really do it with plastic though, because I found the birds will peck at the plastic, so you're really better at doing like a plywood over the top of it to keep them out of it. But I did find plastic in one source. Okay, so then, since we talked about ammonia buildup being a bad thing, I thought I'd put some ventilation stuff in here for you. It's basically a balancing act between keeping the heat in and then getting the gases out, okay? And the gases that we're mostly worried about are gonna be the water vapor, because that's gonna create that dampness within the coop that we don't want. The ammonia from their feces, which is gonna cause the respiratory issues, and then CO2, because they can get CO2 asphyxiation just like we can. So you wanna make sure you try to keep that out. So most coops are naturally ventilated, and what that means is that you're gonna have some holes up here at the top in the rafters, or you know, where the roof and the wall come together. And what happens is warm air rises, right? So the warm air will rise and it'll sneak out these vents out the top. And then cool, fresh air will enter through the inlets that are normally down lower in the walls, okay? In order for this to work though, in order for natural ventilation to work, you need a temperature difference. So if there isn't any warm air to rise, then you're not gonna get any cool air from outside coming in. Or if the temperature inside the coop is the same as the temperature outside the coop, you're gonna get no mixing of air. So you need the temperature outside to be cooler than the temperature inside in order for that air to be pushed out, okay? And if you don't have a temperature difference, then you need wind, because the wind will help. The wind will blow in through the inlet and help move that out and stir it out, okay? Alright, so in extreme colds, you want to make sure that you don't have drafts blowing on the birds, because that's going to make them cold, of course. So if you notice that there's a lot of cold air that's coming in through those inlets, then you wanna kind of have a baffle, if there's any way that you can like decrease that airflow that's coming in. And if you don't have a baffle, then if you could put like a cloth in front of it, so then that way you can use the cloth to sort of break that wind, that cold air coming in, so. Alright, so there's two basic ways to heat your house in the wintertime, or your coop in the wintertime. So you can use the bird's own heat, or you can get an external heater or artificial heating device. So the easiest is gonna be the bird's own body heat, because then you don't have anything extra to do and you don't have any fire risks with it, right? So in order to use their own body heat, you wanna make sure that you kind of confine them to a smaller area. If you've only got a couple birds, confine them into a smaller housing area, because less space means less that you have to heat. Insulate that area really nice, because in that way you don't have as much air exchange going on. And then you may need to clean it fairly often, because you're limiting the amount of space that they're in. So you wanna make sure that there's not a lot of ammonia buildup in there, because we still have to ventilate that smaller space and we still have to keep them clean. So if you're gonna go with a smaller area, you wanna make sure that you're cleaning it and watching the ammonia levels, okay? The other way to do it is to get the heater. If you put in a heater, you wanna make sure that the birds or the litter doesn't touch it. We don't want anything touching it, otherwise it can cause fire. You wanna limit dust buildup, because again, that could ignite with the heat or fire. And then watch for exhaust gases. So ammonia is flammable. So if you end up getting too much ammonia burnt up in there, that could also cause a fire.
Could you talk a little bit more about composting the litter? What the purpose of that is? Like, if you're talking about composting litter for the sake of compost, or composting litter so that it recycles into new litter, or what did you mean by that?
So what happens is, I've never personally composted litter,
Okay.
like in the chicken coop. I do it like outside. But the purpose of composting it inside is so that you get that buildup of heat in the wintertime. So you're using the bird's own heat, but then the heat from the compost as well. I've never done it because I feel it poses too many risks with the ammonia buildup in there, so I normally just completely take it out. And, but I know people do use it, and it has been successful for them. I've just never been brave enough to try it.
How often do you add or change the litter?
It depends on the number of birds, but normally if you do it once a week, you're good. And then what they say is, like, if you're composting, you can leave it in there for a year. You just add more to it once a week, and then you're good for a year, and you take it all out. And your depth will end up being like 14 to 15 inches tall by the time you're done. So, and going into winter, they say that if you're composting, you want your depth to be about 6 inches, and then throughout that winter period is where you add on that additional, say, 6 inches.
And then what's the end? I mean, what's the end? When you compost it, either inside or outside, what's the end?
The end product?
Yeah, what do you use it for?
You throw it all.
Fertilizer.
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking. So you wouldn't recycle it back into chicken raising, but
No.
you're actually talking about composting for regular composting in gardens.
Yes.
Got it.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Like, once it is composted, then you'd put it out in your yard.
Yeah.
Because really, that fresh manure, even when we pasture them, you know, or like if we just let the chickens graze out and do their little thing and do the free range thing, they're gonna drop little drops every once in a while, and that doesn't affect their lawn too much. But if we were to take like a big shovel of that litter straight out of the coop and dump it on our lawn, it's gonna burn the lawn because of the ammonia content in there.
Sure.
But once it goes through that composting, it's now safe for us to dump it on the lawn in big quantities like that, so.
The amount of bedding or litter that you reference, does it matter how thick it is depending on the age of the birds?
I haven't read anything about that.
If you Google, like, it's called deep litter, they refer to it a lot. If you Google deep litter, it'll talk about it more.
Yeah.
But it sounds nasty. I don't know how you would ever, with the amount of if you have more than, I don't know how you'd ever do it. It sounds horrific to me.
I don't know, I take mine out every
Yeah,
week and I put it in a separate
Well,
compost
I
pile.
clean every week, but they have a very large area where they can be in, so that's quite deep with straw. It's straw with holes and they scratch you under your every other time. But they're free range, they can go outside, so they clean themselves. This where they're used at night is kind of honestly.
Right, and that's the area where they're gonna be, yeah. So, just basically, I kind of reiterating in this one what I said before, but I just wanted to show you the picture there of what could happen if you're not careful with the heat source.
How warm do the chickens like it?
It depends on the age of the bird. Your younger birds are gonna like 95 degrees. Your adult birds can tolerate more like 70, 60, and they'll tell you too. You can tell based on the way they interact with each other. So, and I've got, when we talk about brooding, I've got a picture on there, a diagram of them moving out and moving in. So, you know, because it depends, like there's some breeds of chickens that are hairier. You know, they've got kind of like a down undercoat along with the feathers. So that's why I don't want to give you an exact number, because different breeds require different temperatures. So it's best if you gauge it on that animal's behavior, on whether or not he's acting like he's pushing, is acting like he's too cold or too hot. So, lighting, it will affect their egg production if they don't have enough light, so you gotta watch that. And then, they don't need to be toasty warm, but they do need to be warm, okay? And there's a balancing act, we said already, between ventilation, and then you may have to give up optimal conditions to keep the birds warm. So there might be a period where we're below 0 here, and it's really cold outside, so you're gonna have to actually, you know, put the baffles on, put the sheets in front of the inlets, and it's gonna get a little stinky in there, but you have to, otherwise you're gonna get too cold, all right? And if they get too cold, then they're gonna start having, you know, issues trying to keep up with their warmth, their metabolic rate's gonna go up, and they're gonna end up getting weak and sick, and that's gonna cause more issues than just a temporary influx of the ammonia content, so. All right, so, starting chicks. All right, just like the adult birds, they're gonna need water, feed, and heat. This is an example of that corrugated cardboard that I was telling you guys about before to kind of keep them in. And these are just some different, these are like trough type pans for feeding, and then these are just sit on the floor waterers. So there's different ways of doing it. This is just a different example. So it doesn't really matter what your brooding setup looks like, they just need to have water, feed, and heat. However you can provide them that, and you're golden. Okay, so when you're starting chicks out, it's okay if they have 24 hours worth of light. It doesn't matter to them, they want to stay warm. In some places, you'll see they do like 23 hours of light and 1 hour of dark for the chicks, like if you're getting them from a breeder. But it doesn't, they can have 24 hours when they're still that young. They're not photosensitive yet like the adults are. The lights don't need to be very bright. It just, you're basically looking at a heat lamp. So even if you want to get the red heat lamps, that's okay as well. And then you can get light by the natural light. You know, they can, if you've got them outside, or if you've got like a window shining in on them, whatever, it can just be a natural light. Okay, so for chicks, you want to start them at that 90-degree temperature, and then you'll decrease about 5 degrees per week on that temperature. So the way that, the easiest way to get it is just to expand that brooding cardboard that you're using. So you've got your target zone, or where your heat lamp is, and then as the chick moves out, it gets cooler and cooler and cooler for them. So you just want to make sure that they've got a gradient, because one chick might like it in this area, but another chick likes it in that area. So you want to make sure they've got access to different heat gradients. And then it's really important for chicks, more so than the adult birds. It is important in adults, but it's more important for the little guys. No drafts, because you don't want them to get cold or a sudden cross breeze of cold air on them, because they just don't like it. They don't have like the tolerance for it yet. So this is what I was talking about before. So this chart basically, if you want to watch their behavior, so if you look at your chicks, or even your hens, and they're all kind of spread out, all right, and they're not too clustered together, but they're nicely, comfortably spread out, then the temperature within their coop is comfortable. If you see that they're all huddled together and they're like really crowded, then they're too cold, okay? If instead they're like pushed back away as far as they can get, they're up against your brooding cardboard, then it's gonna be too hot for them, okay? And then this is representing draftiness, because there's a draft that's coming through and they're trying to huddle in the corner and get away from it. So watch your birds, and based on what your birds are doing, it'll tell you what your temperature is at, and if they're too cold or too hot.
Once they hatch, you have to take the hen out?
I normally put them in my water trough. Let me think about that.
Because I'm a rookie at this, I don't know.
I think it would depend if she takes care of them, because if you added a heat source into your coop for those chicks, it's gonna be too hot for her, but then also the chickens are gonna peck at that. Because your heat source is gonna have to be, like if my hand is the chick, it's gonna be close here. So it'll be within her pecking range. So after I thought about that, yes, you have to move them out of there. Unless she takes care of them. If she will sit, and tuck them underneath her wings, and she keeps them warm, and you don't need that additional heat source, then you can leave them together.
But will the other chickens eat up her babies?
Not necessarily, they may.
Yeah.
They may, but they won't necessarily, because depending on what her mothering instinct is, she will whip their butt,
Okay.
and then basically they then know, okay, no, we don't touch those.
I have mine separated right now. I have her, she's within earshot of the other ones. They can't get at her or the eggs right
Okay.
now, but she can see them. She's basically in a dog kennel in an insulated dog house.
Yeah. So then I'd say you could watch her and see, because there is a risk, because when there's that size difference, you do have to worry about them picking on each other. Because once they're 4 months of age, then it doesn't matter if I put a 5-month-old with a 2-year-old, because they're the same size. But if I put a 4-month-old, if I put a 2-month-old with a 2-year-old, then there is a likelihood, a very high likelihood, that 2-year-old will pick on that 2-month-old because of the size difference. But with the mother being there, she could whip the other ones into shape and say no.
What about the rooster? Does it have one?
I would keep the chicks away from the rooster
How long?
until they're 4 months old.
Now, what would you do with the different feeds if you kept them in with all your other birds? So chicks are gonna
Because that would be, because you'd do better, to keep them off, because you would have that issue, because you don't want the chicks eating the layer feed. Because it's got calcium in it, and calcium's okay for layers, but it's not okay for your brooders.
Do you have to teach them how to eat and drink?
No, they normally they know how to do that straight off. The one thing that I do for my chicks is for the watering, I make sure they don't have a very deep watering trough, or like even if I get one of those waters, I'll put rocks. Big enough rocks that they can't chew on or swallow, but I'll put rocks in the bottom so they can still get water, but there's no possibility for them to drown. Because they are kind of unsure-footed when they're first hatched. I'm gonna say born, but when they're unhatched. And then, so they could fall into that water and actually drown. So that's why I put the rock ring in there. But you don't have to, I've just had good success with it.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we really should separate the chicks away from the older chickens.
You
when they're
would
born.
do a lot better that way, but I'm thinking in her situation where she's got the one hen, I think you'd be okay keeping that hen with her chicks. But I'd watch her if she's not gonna brood her own chicks, then I would take her out, put her back,
Is an acceptable way to regulate the temperature to raise the lamp too?
You can do that as well. And that's actually what I do because I have fixed walls.
Right.
So I just raise it.
Okay.
Okay, so factors that will affect nutritional needs, it's gonna be breeding strain, age, sex, the rate of growth and production that the bird is giving you, and then their current health, and then the environmental factors, so how cold is it outside, what drafts are there, that type of thing. All right, so different forms of feed. For those of you that have bought chicken feed before, you can get it in the crumble form or the pellet form.
What's in the feed? What's it made out of?
Why? I may come back to that. I think I have it in here.
Okay.
All right, so each company and brand has their own program of what they put into the feed, like what specific, they all have the same nutrients, but they might have different levels of that nutrient in there. So the first type of feed that you have, I took these pictures this morning, so you have to see them. But so the first one is the starter or the starter growing feed, and this one is a crumble, and they're normally going to be between 18 to 22% protein. So it just so happens that this nature-wise is 18% crumbles, but you can get up to 22% protein. If you're looking at a game bird starter, then it's 24 to 28% protein. Those are going to be higher, but you can ignore that statement for this purpose. So then the next one is your grower finisher, okay? And those are gonna be 18 to 22% protein, so you're gonna up that protein content.
You wouldn't feed a laying hen that meat maker.
No, I would not. I would do this one, okay? So then if you have a layer, then the protein content's like 15 to 20%. Okay.
What age do you switch to the pellets?
Well, you mean the layer feed? Because you can get layer feed in crumbles too.
Right. What age do you switch from crumbles to pellets?
Well, they'll start laying, depending on your breed. I normally switch like when they start laying.
When they start laying, okay.
And so like you're looking at 5 to 6 months, 4
I'm
to
just
6
switching when the
months.
first one lays, I'm not even gonna.
Yeah. I normally switch them around 4 months because it's anywhere between that 4 to 6 month period when they're gonna start laying. So,
But it doesn't matter whether you use pellets or crumble, it comes to the place, my chickens don't like the pellets.
yeah.
They like to crumble.
And
But it's the same percentage of protein.
it's the same, yeah, and they have the same nutrients in it. The only difference is that the pellets are squished up to give you crumbles. So, yes, sir.
What about medicated versus non-medicated and organic now? Oh, okay, I figured that.
It's, I've got that later in extras, but I am gonna talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, so kind of to get back to your question, so on each tag, they're gonna have a guaranteed analysis. And so I just pulled these off of 2 different bags. And they've got crude protein, like 16%. They're gonna have different amino acids, so like glycine and methionine. So this one's got 0.7%, a minimum of 0.7, and this one's got a minimum of 0.3, where this one had a minimum of 0.75, and that one had a minimum of 0.35. Then there's crude fat, fiber, calcium, phosphorus, salt, and sodium within your feeds. This one gives you more, okay? So we've got the crude fat, fiber, phosphorus, salt, sodium, but then this one adds in manganese, selenium, vitamin A, vitamin D3, vitamin E. And then we've got this lactobacillus, the acidophilus, and then the KCI lactobacillus. So that's gonna be for like digestive health. That's like our probiotics that we eat in our food. Okay, that's what the lactobacillus is. And the bifidobacterium and the enterococcus faecium, those are the same things. So these last 4 are for probiotic use, okay? And you can buy probiotics separate. So say I wanted to buy this one because it was cheaper, but I still wanted probiotics, you could buy a package of probiotics separate and add it to it, or you could just give them some yogurt, because they'll eat yogurt too. So, that's it.
What about the grit? Now, does the calcium cover that, or do they need additional, like silica sand or, sandbox sand or anything like that, or what do you recommend?
So I would get grit in addition to the calcium or the oyster shells, just because a lot of times the oyster shells will pass through and they won't stay in their gizzard. And then yeah, you can use the silica sand for it, or you can buy the commercial small stones, because even if you let them free range and let them get out and they have access to stones, they'll normally find enough of those small stones that you don't have to supplement the grit. You know.
I'm thinking more like winter, when they're eating, not eating, and.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, so yeah, I know, I took a picture here of some grit too that they had at food. So you can buy just a bag of small stones. Okay. So for those of you that were wondering what grit was, so grit is small stones and it aids in the grinding of the feed in the gizzard. So chickens don't have a true stomach like we do, that with the muscles that crush and everything. So their like breakdown of the food all happens up in their gizzard, and I'm pointing at my throat because that's where their gizzard's at, it's in their throat. And so the grit is just something we add to kind of help with that, because if they never get outside, they never have access to those stones and they can't get them themselves. But if they do have access to outside, a lot of times they're pretty handy at finding them. And then scratch grains. So this is just a picture. I did not cut the bag, by the way, it was cut. I just took the opportunity to take a picture of the cut bag. But so that's just some small stones for the grit. And then this is your scratch grains. So again, it's just gonna have some cracked corn and some barley and oats in there. So it's just a mix of grains, kind of a nice little treat for them, gives them that extra energy in the wintertime. If you want them to be outside, it helps them to kind of learn how to forage if you just sort of throw some out right outside their pen. It gets them, also for your shy ones, it helps them kind of learn how to come out of their coop as well. And then we've done a lot of talking about oyster shells. But oyster shells give us that added calcium, and it's essential to the layer diet. So every time a chicken lays an egg, she will metabolize 8 to 10% of her bone stores of calcium to put into that egg. Okay? So 43% of the calcium within the egg comes from her own bones. The rest of it comes from the calcium in her diet. So the layer diet has calcium in it, but we also have to give her some added calcium. And it's sort of just ad libitum. It's not something they're gonna eat all the time. They can sort of sense when they need it, and they'll go and they'll pick at it and they'll eat it. But you just wanna make sure you have the oyster shells available to them. So that otherwise you'll start to notice you'll get soft shells. So if you start getting soft shells, then it's because she doesn't have enough calcium to put in. And then what'll happen in older birds, when they haven't had oyster shells or enough calcium put into their diet, they'll end up having frail bones, and they can break a leg that way too. So it's not that expensive, but it's kind of a nice thing to add to them. Okay, you can give the birds the table scraps, kind of as a treat. I wouldn't use it to solely replace the food because they need the grains that they're getting out of their pellets and their crumbles. But typically you're gonna give them some leafy and green type stuff. They'll eat like strawberries, yogurt, crushed up eggs. They'll eat that type of stuff too. Meat scraps in small amounts because they are omnivorous, so they'll eat both vegetables, fruits, and then also meat. If you spice your food a lot, kind of watch out for that because some of the spices won't agree with them and they'll end up getting diarrhea. So
What about mealworms and sunflower seeds?
you can do that as well. Yeah, those would be more like a treat though for them.
Yeah, they have that every Sunday, it's their Sunday dinner. Sunday.
So, getting back to your question about the medicated feed, you can purchase medicated feed right now over the counter. And normally it has a coccidia stat in it, so it'll go after like coccidia. And it's basically a bacterium that will cause them to have diarrhea in young chicks. And so you can normally only get medicated feed in like the starter or the chick feed because that's when they're the most susceptible. However, the FDA just passed a new rule saying that medicated feed will no longer be sold over the counter. You have to have a valid veterinary client relationship. And so starting in October, you will not be able to buy medicated feed. So if you want.
They said if you get the Merck cytochrome, if you get the Merck vaccine, which all of mine did, but those 5 I got in my Liga, if you gave them the medicated, it would not be good for the ones that had the Merck vaccine. After I did my reading, so they said not to give it to the ones that had the Merck vaccine. So I had some chickens that had it and some that didn't.
I've never heard.
Yeah, I read an article and it said not to go for the ones that had the vaccines. So then I just went down medicated for all of them because I didn't want to risk any problems with the medicated, or the ones that had the Merck and 5 that didn't.
Did it say why you couldn't give them the medicated?
It said the Merck vaccine that would not do its job if I gave it medicated. If I gave them the medicated starter. I don't know, it was just a study I was reading. So I went, okay, I'll go all non-medicated. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds like it's going to be a non-issue now if you won't sell it medicated.
Yeah, I mean, after October, it won't be an issue, but yeah, I haven't heard.
Is there a problem that I have 13, 2 roosters, so I think get rid of a rooster? I didn't know what the ones were from my reading. So will it matter that 5 of mine didn't get the Merck or no?
Have you ever had chickens on your farm before, or on your property before?
No.
Most likely not. We're gonna talk about Merck later, but Merck's transferred through like dust. And so if you haven't had any chickens on your farm to give you any like chicken dander, you're normally okay. I say normally,
the
but.
person I bought the house from had chickens in his coop prior to me being in.
Oh, well then you might not be okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So will this die? Is that the risk of them?
They don't always necessarily die, but most of the time.
So is there any harm in eating their cakes that they produce if they have that?
If they have Merck?
What is Merck? What's the deal? They just die? I mean, you're talking about killing them if they're not.
You
looking
guys are
good
like
for
20 slides in front of you.
Oh,
How are we doing on time, by the way?
Doing okay. We got about a half an hour.
Okay, all right, so pasturing poultry, just kind of going over this a little bit. There's two main methods, I guess you could say. There's the chicken tractor method, and then there's the day range system, where they go out during the day and then come back in. So the chicken tractor method is where you have a movable pen system. It can be anything, really. It's kind of up to you, but they have this nice area where they can get out and get some sunlight, and then they've got this area back here where they can get out if it's raining or if it's too sunny, they can get back into that area back there. And then again, you still need to provide them with food and water with these systems. They're really common for meat birds, because you don't have to like collect an egg every day. There's no nesting box in there or anything, so you can just slap something like this together and then just go out there and move them. You know, depending on the number of birds, you can move them daily or you can move them twice daily. And then the nice thing about this too is that if you're moving them, they're protected throughout the entire day from any predator, but they're also spreading that fertilizer around, and they're getting all the little bugs in that area and then the next area. But the other method is going to be the day range system. So you can have semi-permanent or permanent housing with this system. So that's going to be your coop that we've been talking about with all the ventilation stuff, is normally where they're going to go home to. And then they have a fenced-in area or a yard that they're going to just basically, you're going to open your coop doors and out they're going to go in the day, and then at night they come home and they go back into their coop. If you want, some people like give them a fenced-in area for like 1 week, and then the next week they go to another fenced-in area because they want to control more of where the birds are going and spreading their manure. Other people just open it up and they go wherever they want to go throughout that period of time.
Where do they lay their eggs?
They'll lay them in the nesting box sometimes, or sometimes they will lay them anywhere.
Oh, Easter egg hunt.
Yes, yeah.
It's not the bunny, it's the chick.
Yeah, so that is one of the drawbacks of this system, is that they don't always lay their eggs where you want them to. But you can kind of train them. So what happens with this system, and I don't know if this is what you did, but the easiest way to train them is you put them in their coop where you want them to come back to at night, close the door, and sort of leave them penned up in there for like a day or two. And then they learn that that's their space, and then you can open it up and they'll come back there every night. When it starts to get dark, they come home. Like I know, Chad, you said I could bring mine, but they were still out and about, so I couldn't find them. But
Do you have to have them fenced in, or will they kind of stay in the vicinity?
they come back, but they do not know fences. So if you have a neighbor that is not amenable to having a chicken come on their yard, then I would say yes, you want to have some sort of fencing system for them. But if your neighbors don't really care, or if you don't have any neighbors, like I have a hayfield on one side and neighbors on the other, so we just put up a fence on the one side where the neighbor is, and so then the chickens can go wherever they want. So fence, that's why I have fence in quotes, because it's kind of dependent on your own situation.
So approximately how far would they travel from the coop?
You know, I think the farthest I've ever had mine go was maybe like a quarter of a mile. I mean, they don't go, they can go far, but they don't go too far because they like to be close to home. So, did you have a question?
I was just gonna ask, what if you are you have woods more around your property? I mean, does that cause more of an issue with?
No, my coop's actually in my woods.
Okay.
So like our property, we have a neighbor on this side, and then we have like our yard that we mow and everything, and then we have woods, hayfield. And ours love the woods because there's tons of bugs and there's fallen trees that are rotting out, and so like if I ever need to find them, they're in the woods. That's why I didn't go hunting for them tonight. But, so no, it's really not an issue at all. I mean, you have to worry more about, you know, like coyotes and stuff because they like the woods too. But as far as the chickens hanging out in the woods, no.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so now general poultry health, getting to some of the diseases that you guys had questions about. So these are ones that can go from the bird to you, so I thought you guys might want to know about those. So you've all heard of salmonella. Okay, so salmonella can be contracted by eating undercooked eggs or contamination from the raw meat. So just make sure basically that you clean your eggs, wash your hands, and that you cook your meat thoroughly. And then histoplasmosis is a respiratory disease in humans caused by soil fungus, and it can grow and build up or in piles of old poultry manure and pigeon droppings. So again, that gets back to make sure you're cleaning your coop on a regular basis. If you're gonna do like the year where you just keep packing in the deep packing, I would use a mask when you go in there to clean it out because this histoplasmosis could be in there. So
Now, you said washing your eggs. I heard if you wash the eggs, you're taking off a protective coating on the eggs. Is that a wise tip?
They don't put a
Because they're really pretty clean.
Yeah, I mean, they normally are, you know, but what I do is I take like a damp rag and wash off whatever poops on there, or manure. I'm sorry, I digress.
Because I've seen egg wash in the store, so
I've never bought that. So, chickens can get respiratory diseases. It's really common in chickens to get respiratory diseases. Different causes, viruses, bacteria, parasites, such as the gapeworm. So the gapeworm is basically a worm that lives in their esophagus, so they get it by eating like an earthworm that has gapeworm eggs in it, and then the worms hatch, and then they get stuck in the, and they basically migrate through the chicken's body back into their throat, and it causes them to cough and hack. And then they can release some of the eggs in their fecal material and then infect the rest of the coop with that. And then high ammonia levels is a big respiratory issue. Okay, so some signs that they've got respiratory disease, coughing, of course, sneezing, and then they can have some discharge coming out of both their eyes and their nostril, kind of like a mucus.
Is there typically less risk if they're free range or have more space to roam?
I would say the less time they spend in confinement, like in a confined building with poor ventilation, the better. If you've got really good ventilation space and it's, you know, well ventilated, well cleaned out, then you're not going to have as much of an issue. But most of the time, the respiratory issues are going to show up in the wintertime because they are in that confined space. So some vectors, like other chickens, like I said with the gapeworm, it spread through the other chickens, that one gets infected and it spreads it to the other ones. Rodents, you want to make sure you keep down your rodent population because they can bring things in their feces or like, and then manure and dust, because dust is an irritant as well for their lungs. Okay. I put avian influenza under a respiratory disease because it does cause some respiratory issues, but I thought we should talk about it a little bit just because it's been in the news. So it is a virus, it's carried by wild birds. The strain that we have going through now has been going by waterfall, okay? So it's kind of, if you watch like the waterways, you'll see a lot of the cases that we've had have been along the waterways where those waterfall have been nesting. So it is common in wild birds, a lot of them have it, it's like any other influenza, that we get sick, we get the flu, but then we normally get over it. Same thing happens in the wild birds, they get sick and they get over it. The issue is that our birds, or our non-native birds, or our captive bred birds, are not used to this virus. They haven't been exposed to it like the wild birds have, so they don't have immunity to it. And so what's happening is that they're dying, or it depends on the strain or the severity of the strain. So it comes in both a low pathogenic strain and a high pathogenic strain. And the strain that's going through currently is a high pathogenic strain, meaning that once the birds contract this disease, they're dying, okay? And so the signs are going to be varied, but they range from having death. You can see discoloration and swelling of the comb, wattles, and hocks. They can have diarrhea, decreased egg production, some respiratory issues. You can see discharge in their eyes and their nose. So they just look sick, basically, if they've got the lower pathogenic strain. And then you can come into having an entire flock that's died if you have the high pathogenic strain. So, okay, so then Merck's disease. It affects chickens that are 12 to 25 weeks old. It's a type of avian cancer that affects the nervous system, and it causes lameness and paralysis. So some of them sort of get over it, like the lameness and paralysis doesn't kill them all the time, but you will notice that they end up kind of being gimpy and everything, so they're less thrifty. So going into wintertime, those would be the ones that you would kind of cull out from your herd. It's a virus that's spread through the air on dust or dander. So if there have been other chickens around that have had it, then there's a possibility that it's still in that coop around that dust.
Yeah, they were helping, they were out healthy and fine, so.
Yeah, so, there's no treatment for it, so once a bird has it has it for life, or it could die from it. And then there is the vaccine that's available, but you have to, like I said, you have to do it when they're first hatched or while they're still in the embryo, or still in the egg.
How do you do that?
They poke a needle. They like drill a little hole and then poke a needle into the shell and give it to them. Well, they do it in the hatcheries, so there's no mama hen.
Oh, so what do I do?
I don't think you can buy Mercs over the counter. Yeah,
So
I
when
think
they
you have to
hatch?
have the vet, yeah, when they hatch, you have to have the vet come out and do them. Yeah. Another non-respiratory disease is gonna be egg drop syndrome. And this causes thin to no shelled eggs and a reduced egg production. It's transmitted from hen to chick, so like if the hen has it and then there's a chick around the hen that has it, she can transmit it to that chick, okay? There's no treatment for it, however, molting does seem to restore the egg production from that hen. So molting is the process of the hen losing her feathers. So basically what happens is the daylight shortens, coming into wintertime, they will naturally go through a molt period, their egg production will decrease, and then they'll start to lose their feathers, and then they'll get a new set of feathers every year. And that's a natural process. They do that because as they lay eggs, their feathers get damaged. So then at the end of the year, they'll kind of refresh and restore.
Is there anything you can give them to help them through the molt period?
No, you kind of just gotta let them do their thing. Another non-respiratory disease is pylorium. And so pylorium, if you're showing your hens, they have to be pylorium tested free. And so we do have a couple of people that go around the county or around the state, but I know we have one here in the county that's in charge of pylorium testing. And it causes death of chicks at 2 to 3 weeks of age. They get droopiness, weakness, pasted vents with white diarrhea, kind of like a chalky type diarrhea is what they end up getting. And then it's transmitted from the hen, but then if any eggs she lays while she has pylorium, or if she's recovered from pylorium, she still carries it in her system, she will pass to the egg, and then when that chick hatches, it will be pylorium positive. So if you have any hens that have pylorium, you should eradicate them from your flock, and actually you have to by law, so. All right, so other concerns, we can get mites. So the size of the mite tends to be about 1 millimeter in diameter. They're kind of a dark reddish black, and this is just kind of a picture of some of the mites that it's on here, are mites. The egg color of the mites is gonna be kind of a white to off-white. And then the egg location, so where the mites are gonna lay their eggs, are gonna be along the feathers in the shaft. And then some signs that your bird might have mites, besides seeing it, is they're gonna have decreased feed intake, decreased egg production, and decreased weight gain, of course, because they're not eating. And then because of the mites, it makes them more susceptible to other diseases, so. And then, thank you, another thing that you get is lice, and so lice are gonna be 2 to 3 millimeters long. The color's gonna be light brown, and the eggs are gonna be white, and that's what, these here are some eggs, and then these are the actual lice down here. And so some signs, again, that they might have lice is they're gonna have lower feed intake, lower egg production, and lower weight gain. And again, they're gonna be more susceptible to other diseases. And so to treat lice and mites, they sell like a dust bath, a medicated dust bath, and you wanna have that available and you wanna dust them. And even, like again, I don't know how many of you are gonna be showing any animals or have kids that are showing, before you take them to fair, they have to be dusted for a couple weeks beforehand to make sure that they're lice and mite free, so.
How do you do that?
So they do it, actually. You just put out a pan with the dust in it, and then they'll go in it, and they'll like wiggle around and flap their wings, and I'm not a very good chicken, but, you know, they really take care of it themselves. I mean, if you wanted, you could like sprinkle some on top of them, but they do a great job of doing it themselves, so just give them a pan that they can jump into.
Hop into one after another and
Yeah.
do business? Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have to worry about those lice, passing to humans?
No, they're a chicken mice.
Yeah. If your bird showing you those respiratory, you know, they're showing respiratory, what do you do? I'm just afraid you're going to kill them instead of, you know,
If you do see any signs of respiratory, check and see if your ammonia levels are high. Like go in your coop and if it really stinks like ammonia, clean it out really well. That's always the first approach, is clean it out, make sure there's no ammonia sources for them. If they still have the respiratory stuff, if they've got the gape worms, you can actually kind of like spread the feathers back so you can see the skin, and you can kind of shine a light on them, and sometimes you can see them, they're red, they're bright red, and you can see them wiggling through there. It's really gross, but,
And then what do I do? And then I
you can call your vet and have them give you like a wormer to worm them. If you're not into the vet thing, then I would just euthanize them.
should kill these things for all the things.
I said call your vet first.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
But that's if it's gape worms, you know, I mean, because you gotta get them treated, otherwise they're gonna spread it to the rest of the flock.
And these are all prevalent in like Wisconsin and Midwest, or, okay?
Yeah.
Would you do this little dust thing, like lice thing preventatively?
I would. Yes.
So if your chickens do have any of these diseases and you have to get rid of them, I'm assuming you can't eat them. So, because, I mean, my thing is I'm gonna have these chickens and they're gonna be, mostly I want them for the eggs, but then when they get old, I'm assuming
You can eat them, yeah.
but not if they have any of these chicken illnesses.
If they have like gape worm, I mean, that's gonna stick primarily in their throat, so I guess it depends on your ick factor, you know.
But it's, I guess what I'm saying is it bad for me?
No.
Okay.
Do you
How
have
about your
chickens
eggs?
yet?
When they, let's say
You won't wanna
they
eat
lay
them
an
once
egg
they-
right as you notice that they've got it.
I looked cows in the eye.
What about respiratory?
Oh, well then.
Because they're not gonna pass the gape worms into the eggs.
Or what, anything besides these?
Yes.
I mean, well, they will that one,
I think it goes through hens and shit.
yeah, but that's not, it's not gonna affect us. You know, once you cook that egg up, it'll be fine.
My next question would be, with that, you know, is there any of these that we have to worry about transferring into the meat? Like, you know, CWD and that kind of stuff with beer, or, you know, any kind of cancers? I mean, will it, if there is cancer into the bird, is it noticeable when you're butchering?
You'll see, like, for the avian influenza ones, they'll have like growth abnormalities within their body when you're butchering them. Mercs, I probably would not eat a bird if it's got Merck's disease, but they're also dying so young that
It's not even an issue.
yeah,
Well,
it's not really
I'm
an
assuming
issue.
that if I have a bird that just dies, I'm not gonna.
You're not gonna eat
Because
it.
I don't know what it died from.
Right.
But if I'm at, you know, at the end of their useful life, going to butcher them, I want to be able to eat them,
Yeah.
you know.
And most of the time you can. I mean, just when you're butchering that, I'd look for like growths and abnormalities within that bird, for like signs of cancer. And then I wouldn't eat that cancerous tissue or that tissue that has the growth lesion around it.
Sure.
But if it's, you know, like if it's not, I mean, you know, just because it has a respiratory issue doesn't mean that it's gonna affect the meat component of it.
Or age, the age of the bird, if it.
The age does it. I mean, it gets tougher, you know,
More
but
like a soup.
it's more of a soup bird
Yeah.
than, yeah. I mean, most layers become soup birds just because of the toughness of it.
Right. And how long do they lay? Like, what's your average life of a laying hen?
So when we get to layers, I'll talk about that, but it's, it depends again on how hard they're laying and how well we took care of them, but from like 3 to 5 years.
Okay,
So-
so you do have them for a while.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so biosecurity, just real quick, make sure you keep your distance from other flocks, keep your flock clean, don't haul any disease home, so make sure if you're bringing birds from other places that you know that they're clean. Don't borrow disease, so don't borrow water from an infected flock. Make sure you're informed about the diseases that are out there that can be transmitted, and then if you have sick birds, make sure you report them. Okay, so layers and hens. So there's different colors of eggs. So you've got your brown eggs, your white eggs, and your greenish colored eggs, and then they come in different sizes, shapes and sizes. So I already said the color is due to the pigmentation in the feathering or the skin of the bird. It has nothing to do with the nutrient quality of the egg. And then the size and the shape, when your bird first starts laying, those of you that already have birds laying, you'll notice they'll be kind of small. And then as the bird ages, you get larger shells, or larger eggs. And there's kind of a trade-off because the younger birds will give you smaller eggs but thicker shells, and the older birds will give you larger eggs and thinner shells. All right, so your laying hen is going to be small frame, kind of angular in appearance, And then you want her to be healthy and vigorous, of course. All right, so a hen in production. When she's in production, her comb and wattles are gonna be large, bright red, and waxy, okay? But when she's out of production, those combs and wattles are gonna be small, they're gonna be pale in color, and they're gonna be shriveled up a little bit. Her pubic bones are gonna be flexible when she's in, I was gonna say in heat, but when she's in production, because she has to get that egg out. But when she's not, then the pubic bones are gonna be rigid and they're gonna be close together. The vents are gonna be large and moist, and then when she's out of production, the vent is gonna be small and dry. And then the abdomen is gonna be full and pliable when she's in production as well. Kind of. So as the bird produces her egg, she's gonna have some pigment bleaching. So you can first start to see pigment bleaching in the eye ring, so this is the area right around the eye, or in her earlobe. And then you can see it in her vent as well within a week. So these kind of happen, I'd say almost simultaneously, but you can see it mostly in the vent first, and then in the eye ring and the earlobes. Then you'll start to notice it in her beaks, and then in her shanks, you'll see it after that. She'll start to go from like a yellow color in the shanks down to like a white pale color. And that's when she's getting towards the end of her wean.
For the season? For the summer?
Yeah, for the season. Yeah, because then you'll notice she'll go into a molt period.
Okay.
So lighting, again, with your layers, they're long day breeders, meaning that they need a long time period, a light period in order to lay eggs. So they need 13 to 17 hours, with 16 hours being the most optimal. So if you're gonna supply light for them, you wanna do about 16 hours worth. So this is her reproductive tract. Start off, so these are her egg yolks right here. So the egg yolk is released and the infundibulum sort of moves over and grabs it. It's this first part of her oviduct. So it picks up the yolk after it's released, and fertilization, if it's going to occur, occurs in this part of the reproductive tract. And then the yolk is in that part for about 15 minutes. The next is the magnum. And so that thick albumin, or the area immediately around the yolk, when you crack your egg open, you can see, that dark or that thicker gelatinous stuff right around the yolk. That's formed in the magnum, and that takes about 3 hours. From there, it goes to the isthmus, and this will add the inner and the outer shell membranes, and it'll be in there for about 1 1/4 hours or so. Then next you have the shell gland, or it's also called the uterus, but this will add the shell, and it'll spend the most amount of time within the shell gland, and that's 21 hours. And then the last part is your vagina right down here, and the only purpose of the vagina, it doesn't add anything to the egg because it's completed once it leaves the shell gland. The vagina just helps kind of push it out of the hen's body, so it's just a muscle that helps extrude it out. Okay, so real quick, I thought I'd add some egg irregularities, things that you can see in your egg. So mottling is where you have pale spots on the yolk. Most people don't even notice that they're there, and there's really no effect to the nutrient value of the egg. You can eat that. There's the double yolked eggs, and this is related to the hen's age. So younger hens will give us more double yolking than older hens, and it's just because they ovulate too close in succession. So it ovulates one yolk, and then it ovulates another one too quick, and the two get bunched up in the tract. There's also a genetic component to it, so some lines of birds will actually give you more. It's kind of like twinning in humans, same thing like twinning in chickens. Yolkless eggs, this happens sometimes in young hens, so it pretty much has no yolk to it. And what happens is a little piece of material is sloughed off into the oviduct, and it sort of triggers the bird into thinking that it's making an egg, even though it's really not, and then you've got blood spots, and this is where you have a small break in the blood vessel when the yolk is ovulated, and so there's just a little streak of blood in there right around the yolk. Then meat spots are brown in color. It's associated with the egg white, and again, that's sloughing throughout the tract. So if a piece of tissue from the tract sloughs into it, and then it gets incorporated into it. And you can eat all of these. It's just a matter again of your yuck factor. Okay, market birds. I promise I am almost done. Okay, so your market birds, some considerations. If you're looking at a commercial broiler, you're gonna end up having more of that plump breast, because that's what they've been bred for, is more of a meat type frame. If you're gonna be doing a dual purpose bird, then they're not gonna have that big of a breast to them, because that's not what they were, marketed for or bred for. Your meat birds, you wanna look at their growth rate, because you want them to gain really quick so that you can get them to market or out. Another thing is different birds have different tastes and textures to their meat as well, depending on their breed, so, and that's personal preference. Alright, and I didn't know, is anybody here planning on selling any of their poultry product? No? Okay, then I'll skip that. But there are rules around that, I'll skip determining your price too. Alright, so then, other resources, if you want, Extension does have a poultry resource page. If you just Google like poultry UW Extension, it should come up. And then there's a couple of publications that we have too. There's Guide to Raising Healthy Chickens, Producing Poultry on Pasture, and then the Poultry Arc. So if you want to know how to make one of those tractors, they call it the Poultry Arc. And you can get those from the learning store. And then University of Kentucky has a really good page, and then North Carolina does as well. So I just put those on there.
Can you go back to that slide on how many you can have and whatnot?
For the sale.
Let's say somebody, you wanna raise some for your friends or whatever. Is there rules on that? I mean, I didn't even know about the ID thing. So can you get 100 chickens and sell 50 of them or 25 or 70, whatever?
If you're selling them from your back door, no problems. You don't really have to do anything. You just want to make sure that your birds are healthy, and that with your friends, I mean, you're doing it with your friends, so it's not that big of a deal, but like if you were gonna sell it, from your front door, you'd want to mark them as not being inspected. The issue comes in is if you want to sell it at the farmer's market, because then you have to get a mobile retailer's license. So, but if you're not planning on selling at the farmer's market, then no, you can, it's just like, if you have eggs, you can just sell your eggs from your farm door too, it doesn't matter, or your house door.
Is there any, liabilities, let's say?
Not currently.
Well, I think if you label them as not inspected, then it's
You
like
have to
at your
have a
risk.
disclaimer?
Yeah, I mean, you are supposed to, if you sell them from your premises, I'll read it. It says, birds are healthy, producers can slaughter and sell birds without inspection or a license. Producer maintains custody of the bird until it's sold. Birds can only be sold directly to the consumer. Birds are labeled not inspected, and they have the name and address of the producer and net weight. So, I mean, you would have to put a little sticker on there that says not inspected, and that's kind of your disclaimer.
So I can sell live birds to anybody as long as they come to my house and buy it.
Yeah.
So I don't want to deal with butchering, but if somebody wants them, they can take
Yeah.
care of that themselves.
Right.
There's butcher shops that do it.
Can I ask you a question about rooster?
Yeah.
Because of those buff things, I think that they want to do that.
If you want to get rid of them, I'll really take them off your hands.
Well, I have 2 roosters, so I have 2 roosters from what I've read, so I have 11 chickens. They're all girls, and then 2 hens. And then I have these 2 roosters, one's the regular size buck, and then I have, in this flock, I have 2 phantoms. 1 rooster, I think, in my knowledge, and then 1 hen. So the 2 bantams are these little guys, and one's a rooster, like I said, then I regular, so I can't keep both roosters, am I correct? I'll have issues.
Yeah, your standard rooster will most likely end up
So
being.
Sebastian's gonna beat up Pee-wee.
Yeah.
That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
So if I keep the little guy, I've named him, I'm not killing him. If I, someone's gonna have to kill him eventually, but if I keep the little, is it okay if I keep the rooster bantam, the little guy?
And get rid of.
Pee-wee, if I keep Pee-wee, he's the bantam, and give you Sebastian, the
That
big
would
guy,
hurt.
for you. But will it work okay for my flock if the rooster's the little guy? A bantam.
Yeah, I know, I'm wondering, and all your hens except for 1 are standard?
Yeah, so 2 bantams,
Do you have,
Pee-wee and
how
Squirt.
old are your hens right now?
What?
How old are your hens?
I got them in May, so Or April.
Okay, so in your bantam rooster, Pee-wee, he's the same age?
They're all the same.
I'm thinking depending on how much like testosterone he produces and how much he exerts his territory, since they're gonna be bigger than him, that might not work. I don't know that you're gonna wanna keep Pee-wee.
But Pee-wee and Squirt lay on their backs and let me rub their bellies.
Oh, I would separate them.
Yeah, you can separate.
No, I'm not separating.
You could keep them and see how they do, because, you know, worst case, they're gonna set up a pecking order.
They do fine right now, I mean, there's nothing, the bantams aren't getting picked on.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
You think,
but
you think eventually that Pee-wee and Squirt are getting picked on? Eventually you're thinking, because I have two bantams in there? Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm just thinking that Pee-wee's not gonna be the dominant in that.
Well, if the rest are girls, doesn't matter, I mean, doesn't matter, then.
You can have a dominant hen.
Do you think, what is a, okay.
And so, like, okay, so, can I go on?
Yeah, I don't know.
So my concern is that if you have a dominant hen instead of Pee-wee being the dominant, then it's good to have a rooster, because roosters kind of like keep the hens from picking on each other. And if one of the hens is the dominant one in there instead of Pee-wee, then she's gonna boss around the other hens and she's gonna pick on them, instead of Pee-wee being the one that's like, knock it off, behave.
Oh, okay.
You know, so that's my only concern. I don't really necessarily think that Pee-wee and Squirt are gonna get picked on. I just don't know that your dominant hen's gonna leave alone the other ones. But I think if you watch them, you'll notice a pecking order sort of developing as they get older. They're still young now,
Yeah.
so they don't have much of a pecking order yet, but the pecking order normally goes based on size
Oh,
and
yeah.
aggressiveness. So I mean, he could be small and really aggressive.
He's not.
Yeah, if he's not
I was
aggressive.
never- I wasn't even get a rooster. I was just gonna have 12 all girls. That's a problem.
Don't work that way.
Well, you're supposed to have a rooster? I didn't know that.
No, you don't have to.
You don't have to have a
But
rooster.
then you'd have an aggressive girl. I'm gonna have an aggressive girl.
You normally have one hen that will develop as your boss.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that a bad
But
It's not necessarily a bad thing, except if she's busy bossing, she's not laying.
So like if we have 2 or 3 hens, because that's all I really want, then there's gonna be a boss. You just watch to make sure that she's not overly aggressive, and if she is, then kill her. She goes in the pot, or what?
One's not productive, but then does the next one take her place?
Yeah.
So you end
Yeah,
up
so you're
keeping,
always,
You're always cycling through, so I would just, you know, she's gonna be dominant. And, you know, you're gonna notice probably that maybe she's not, you know, laying as much, or she's kicking the other ones out of the nest box. Because that's mostly what happens, is that the dominant one will kick the other ones out of the nest box, but then you put in another nest
I was
box.
gonna say, so if I have 3 hens and 3 nesting boxes, then I should know.
You should be okay.